we have moved
Live
on.
streaming is on.
Now, this issue may seem quite complex, and it may seem pretty unreasonable for a bunch of high schoolers to suddenly stop Islamophobia and gun violence, even if we really didn't want to move on. It's easy to say, but if you had the power to make change, would you? After all, we are the same people that read a depressing article on how California is suffering from a major drought and take a 30-minute shower. We are the same people that read a nerve-wracking article on how populations of marine life are dying due to littering, and a few hours later refuse to pick up the plastic bottle that's lying in front of us because it isn't ours. We are the same people. Personally, I've become a victim to this move on culture. In 2011, my aunt and my cousin got into a major road accident, with my aunt being declared dead on the spot. My cousin, whom I had shared so many childhood memories with, became partially paralyzed. It hurt me to see my entire family crumbling in front of me, and unable to cope with the stress, I turned to my friends for help, and they gave me a simple piece of advice. Move on. Sing more, compose music, go on more frequent jogs, exercise, and just distance yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I distanced myself, and guess what? I had successfully moved on. But in that process, I had become a terrible niece to my uncle, a terrible sister to my cousin, and a terrible human being that wasn't there when my family needed me the most. You can only ignore something for so long. If you decide to participate in this move on culture, then it will get back to you, but harder. Now I'm grieving the incident like I should have done years back, with something else combined. Guilt. Guilt for not being there. Now, as simple as this issue may sound, the solution is actually quite simple and bland. Just stop moving on. Instead of moving on, grow on. Use that painful memory or that failed relationship to fix yourself and realize the importance that it has had on your life. Proudly own it and remember it not as pain, but as change. It may take time, but it is definitely worth it. And for the societal prejudices that have been unsolved, just take action. In fact, by talking right here, we've already started that mission. So, for the 106 Americans yesterday that died because of guns, today, organize a strike and make a flyer with stats on gun violence and tell all your friends to share the flyer on social media and spread it. In a week, who knows how many people will be protesting with you. And with media attention, it may expand across school districts, cities, and states. You may be the reason behind the next national surge of gun violence protests. And this time, the government may ban guns. And you would be the cause. You would never know unless you tried. And if every single one of us took action instead of just scrolling through our feed and moving on, I'm confident that we can solve the majority of the issues that plague our society today. So, stop moving on, fight back, and take action. So guess what? I've taken the first step to bring Gautier back into our memories. At least now, the 7 of you in this round remember Gautier, the winner of 14 ARIA awards, Grammys, and his iconic song titled Somebody That I Used to Know. So Gautier, we never really cut you out. We were just the victims of this move on culture. We've always really loved you though. You'll always be somebody that we've always known. Thank you. And judges, just making sure, did you have the title of my speech, or I can put it in the chat?
Yeah, we did. It's moving on.
Right, yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, judges. I'm just going to make sure my camera's ready.
Good.
And I've put the title to my piece in the chat.
We're ready, Zubin, whenever you are.
Great. All right. King Ravana goes through intense prayer in order to receive a single blessing from the god Shiva. Ravana waits for several thousand years for Shiva to show up, but there's nothing. So he decides that the only way to show the god his undying commitment is by obviously cutting off his head. After he does so, he realizes that a new one has sprouted up in its place. So he decides to do what any logical person would do. He cuts off his head 9 more times. Finally, after 11,000 years of praying and head chopping, Shiva appears. Ravana and his newly sprouted 10 heads humbly request for the gift of immortality, which Shiva refuses. And that's the end. No, really, all you gotta know after that is Ravana went on this massive rampage and was labeled the bad guy for all of Hindu mythology for time to come. To be honest, I would be pretty mad also if I had to wait 11,000 years just to hear the word no. Ultimately, Ravana's actions were inspired by pure devotion, a form of something we universally understand as kindness. But that's where lines begin to blur. You see, each of Ravana's 10 heads represent the 10 evils of mankind. Lust, anger, delusion, greed, pride, mind, envy, will, intellect, and most importantly when it comes to kindness, ego. According to author Roy Martin, we often show kindness out of guilt or the need to fulfill our egos, and that is my concern today. Are we performing kind gestures to genuinely better the lives of the people around us, or to push our own agendas? We can explore this by first severing any misconceptions about our definition of kindness. Next, hacking through some real-world consequences of the kindness conundrum in our society. And finally, beginning to regrow with some solutions to how we can better implement real kindness in our everyday lives. Now, don't get me wrong. Everyone does kind things for self-gain, whether they realize it or not. For instance, we all know that when June 1st comes around, all these sleeping corporate giants decide to suddenly wake up and support everything LGBTQ by slapping a rainbow sticker on their products. Some of these companies include Walmart, Coca-Cola, and AT&T, who show their support by making their Twitter page rainbow-themed. But these same companies have also donated a whopping $400,000 to anti-LGBTQ legislators who actively blocked the passing of the Equality Act. Even someone as devout as Ravana is susceptible to these simple faults. I mean, do you think he's praying to Shiva for 11,000 years just to hear the word no? No, the guy wants to become immortal. But don't forget about our lovely politicians. During a town hall public forum, former President George Bush was approached by a mother who expressed her concern about having to work 3 jobs simultaneously just to care for her family. In an effort to come across as caring and compassionate, the former president concluded that her experience was uniquely American. I mean, that is just fantastic. You're doing that. Before we can digest how economic inequality isn't exactly patriotic, we need to understand where these misconceptions arise from, our very definition of kindness. According to the Kindness is Everything Foundation, it is the sincere and voluntary use of one's time, talents, and resources to genuinely better the lives of others, the world, and ourselves through genuine acts of love, compassion, generosity, and service. Now, although that was a mouthful, there is a simple takeaway from that statement. Kindness comes from a place of sincerity. Let's look at a hypothetical. We feel the need to connect with a friend who has expressed online about how they're grieving the loss of a loved one. And so, we write them a short blurb along the lines of, "So sorry for your loss. Let me know if you need anything. My deepest condolences." From the sender's point of view, the job is done. But when the receiver gets 50 other comments that look exactly the same, it becomes clear that these words have little value in actuality. According to ethicist Matt Beard, by doing this, we offer support we don't mean, have no intention of following up on, clear our conscience, and worst of all, walk away with all the social kudos of offering public support without fully recognizing the costs that support actually requires. It isn't kindness. It's a big load of insincere, performative nothingness. Essentially, a lie. And I hope we can agree that that is truly unkind. This idea of handing out empty gestures labeled as kindness extends past just Hindu mythology. In fact, we have created an entire culture based around it. For as long as we can remember, we are taught to be kind to, well, everybody. It's a simple concept that seems to make sense, but picture this. Here, in this very real box, is all the kindness I have to offer. When I try to give it to everyone, I spread myself thin, offering the bare minimum, which can be perceived as disingenuous. We may believe that the bare minimum is acceptable. It's better than nothing. But it is incredibly clear that sufficing for these lowest hanging fruit often results in devastating consequences. What better example is there than the one that's preventing us from even speaking today in person? COVID. Wearing a mask in public seems pretty simple, right? In a survey conducted from 2021 by the New York Times, 83% of Americans claim that wearing the facial coverings protects themselves and others from the spread of the virus. However, only 51% of the same sample group says that they actually wear the facial coverings. The last time I checked, those numbers don't add up. How can someone preach about staying safe while also making the conscious decision to take off their mask in a public setting? I mean, wearing the mask wasn't even a kindness. It was a basic human responsibility. Recognizing the value of wearing it and still compromising others' safety and security is when we cross the line. Even now, while mandates are beginning to be repealed and large events are coming back on track, we have to ask ourselves, did we stop caring because COVID stopped being an issue? Or because we were just too tired and inconvenienced to do the bare minimum? We forget that an average of 1,900 COVID-related deaths still occur every day, a number comparable to the mortality rate of 9/11. But we don't see the same fervor to take action or even acknowledge its existence, do we? My point is, kindness is not just doing the bare minimum. Kindness is not just saying the right words. And kindness is not an excuse for inaction, especially if it's just a band-aid for meaningful change. In an age that is defined by its surface levelness through performative activism and virtue signaling, a solution to our kindness conundrum simply seems unattainable. So, how can we go forward and dismantle this massive societal issue? Well, to be frank, I don't really have an answer for you. You see, kindness is something that grows within each of us as we progress through life. We develop an understanding of the word from the relationships we build with one another, with our families, our friends, our teachers, even our neighbors. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood taught youth across the nation that kindness is key. In the wise words of Mr. Rogers himself, imagine what our neighborhoods could be like if each of us just offered one kind word a day. We can follow in his footsteps by healthily challenging ourselves to complete real actions with real impacts in 3 simple steps. First, we must reassess the genuinity behind our gesture by putting ourselves in the shoes of the receiver. Instead of asking questions like, what do I gain from helping someone? Try asking more perceptive questions from the receiver's point of view. Questions like, what do they need right now? How can I help them best? When we answer questions like these, our need for reciprocation and validation vanish. Next, as selfish as it may sound, kindness should be exclusive to a degree. Just like we've been trained to show it to everyone blindly, we've also become too carefree with our most powerful emotion, love. While the intentions behind screaming, "I love you," to Justin Bieber at a concert may be well-meaning, by overusing such a powerful word, we lose its value. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is hold out on our next "I love you" and save it for the moments and individuals that truly matter the most. Finally, but most obviously, we have got to keep the chain going. When you are treated with kindness, learn to pay it forward in a unique way that applies to the individual. Offer to help someone even when they don't ask for it. Ask a friend what's wrong if they're looking sad. And please, please, Don't go chopping off your head to impress any god. There are literally thousands of better ways to go doing that. Lust, anger, delusion, greed, pride, mind, envy, will, intellect, and ego. We know what these words mean and the power they hold over us, whether it's the epic tales of Ravana or the simple workings of our lives. How we choose to expel these thoughts is entirely up to us. Only when we can say that we hold no privatized goal in our every action is when we can say that we have done a truly kind gesture. Not just for the people around us, not even for the world, but for ourselves. Thank you.
Hello, judges. So the title of my speech will be You Speak Funny. And I just sent it in the chat. When all the judges are ready, we can start.
Question,
Yeah.
do we have the times on the first two speakers? If
Yeah,
somebody-
I've been keeping the time. I can type in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, Arthur, I think we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, perfect. Let's start. Everyone is afraid of something. Clowns, politics, the clowns in politics. But my biggest fear was always saying my own name. Now, I know this might sound funny, but ever since I started speaking, I had a speech impediment. Among the words that I couldn't pronounce, I struggled with the R and TH sounds the most. And ironically enough, my name was composed entirely of those letters. To me, saying my name was a constant burden in my life. Unfortunately, there was no way around this. We are a language-driven society, constantly talking with friends, families, and coworkers. But the problem arises when we expect everyone to speak in the same way. In her New York Times best-selling novel, Professor of Linguistics Deborah Tannen puts it best. Most of us judge others' competence by the way they speak. And this leads me to my main concern. We have accepted a false standard for articulacy, one where we expect others to speak without accents, stutters, and lisps. And if someone doesn't meet the standard, we label them as inarticulate. And everyone does it. Whether it's viewing someone we meet with an accent as slightly foreign, to voice assistants such as Siri being programmed not to listen to those with lisps, to even our own president being mocked simply for stuttering. When we tell them that they aren't articulate, we're telling them that they aren't worth listening to. So today, let's start listening. First, let's hear how we discriminate against those who speak differently. Next, let's understand how silencing people's voices leads us to overlook their capabilities. Until finally, let's speak up by articulating some solutions. Growing up with a speech impediment, people often told me, "You speak funny." Well, maybe I should become a comedian. But I later realized that it was because I spoke differently. And this leads us to the first way where our problem pans out. When someone doesn't speak to our standards of articulacy, we look down upon them. And the clearest example of this is through television. Like millions of other Star Wars fans, I love Jar Jar Binks. But I soon realized that others just like to make fun of the way he spoke. In fact, this was intentional. The producers had Jar Jar speak differently, just to play for laughs. And while this example may seem insignificant, our perspective on speaking differences extends far beyond the movie screen. African American Vernacular English, more commonly known as AAVE, is considered by most school systems as the wrong way of speaking. Author James Hill explains that I grew up thinking that no adult would take me seriously if I spoke it. But in reality, AAVE is a perfectly acceptable way of speaking. But to us, difference meant incompetence. And this mindset also affects our personal lives too. In a study done by Professor of Communication Sciences Robert Mayo, he found that 62% of participants say that they would not date someone who stuttered, as if their stutters matter more than their stories, personality, or characteristics. We make those with perfectly unique voices feel less confident, less competent, and less human. And this leads us to the second way where our problem pans out. When we silence the voice of those who are different, we lose out on their ideas. And some of the greatest minds of all time, like Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and Alan Turing, were people who had a speech impediment. But by today's standard, they aren't articulate. We would have set a barrier to their success, just like what we do towards the millions of those who speak differently. And I've seen it firsthand. My mother, an immigrant from China with a heavy accent, came to the United States just to give me a better life. But after multiple unsuccessful job interviews here, she tells me that her biggest weakness is her voice. These days, I find her watching Friends just to learn proper English. It's because of our desire for articulacy, which makes us want to reject our own voices just to fit in. For my mom, she felt that her master's degree paled in comparison to her accent. And this is no coincidence. It's no coincidence when 76% of employers admit to discriminating against accented applicants. It's no coincidence when 37% of those with accents have changed their voices because of the workplace, just like my mom. And it's no coincidence when 20% of these people have turned down a job offer or even a promotion because of their own insecurities about their voice. Because when these people are told day after day that their voices aren't enough, they begin to feel that they aren't enough. And trust me, they're not alone. When I was in third grade, I missed 3 classes a week to meet with my speech therapy. I still remember the embarrassment, the missed assignments, and the confused stares I received as I was pulled out of class every other day. But despite everything, my parents and my therapist all expected me to become articulate. I even expected that of myself. But that day never came. Despite investing so much time, I made no progress. It even got to the point where my own speech therapist gave up on me. It made me feel broken. Why wasn't I enough? So, after 3 years and countless classes, I decided to quit the program, to accept my speaking disability as a part of myself and move on. And so did everyone around me. But then something strange happened. Only after I accepted my speaking disability was I able to pronounce words that I was never able to before. It was a miracle, or maybe it was puberty. But either way, it was the moment when everyone stopped expecting me to become the effective communicator, to become the eloquent speaker, to become articulate. And I was able to find my voice. My name went from a burden to a blessing. Hi, my name is Arthur 2. I have a list, and I'm fine with that. So, how can we all find our true voices? First, we need to listen. When we meet someone who is struggling to convey their ideas, let's at least hear them out. Instead of ignoring those who speak differently, let's politely ask them to repeat themselves. And we can start today, whether it's at the dinner table, to the workplace, to even these beautiful speeches being presented. Let's make sure that no one is left unheard. Next, let's honestly acknowledge and combat our unconscious stereotypes against those who speak differently. We must stop viewing the 86 million immigrants with an accent as un-American, the AAVE community as uneducated, or those with speech impediments as incapable. Instead, let's help these people find their voices by supporting organizations that actively combat this bias, like the NSA, the National Stuttering Association, of course. And finally, let's rethink articulate. When we think of articulate, we think of the smooth public speaker who can move a large audience. But articulate can also mean the accented Chinese mother who's trying her best to learn the language. Articulate can mean those who stutter because of Parkinson's disease. And articulate can mean anyone with a lisp. Which is why articulacy should mean someone like Stephen Hawking, who are not articulate because of the sound of their voice, but because of the beauty of their ideas and their willingness to share. Looking back, I never expected that I'd join speech and debate to participate in an event which required me to speak in front of an audience. Yet, we are all so lucky to be here today, where for these 10 minutes, all of our voices matter. All of us are articulate. So let's speak up. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a time on that, George?
Is it Manoj who asked for the time?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Tejal. I've been keeping the time track, so I can send.
Okay, thanks. If you can send it afterwards, that's fine too.
Yeah, thanks. I believe we have John next, right?
Yes, that's me. Before I start, I would like to say I am giving my speech in my school building. There's been construction going on, and we're right next to an airport. So there might be some loud noises while I'm speaking. I hope it isn't too big of an issue. All right, is everybody ready?
Yep.
Solid. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm lost. I'm going to college next year. I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. And the only adult thing I know how to do is laundry, and I'm not great at that either. This shirt used to be white. So I went to the wisest person I know, my uncle, a doctor. Clearly, he has his whole adulting thing worked out. I asked him, Bo, how did you find your calling? And what he said next changed my life. John, I hate my job. I was shocked. I asked him, why haven't you ever said anything about this before? And he told me he was ashamed. He didn't want the family knowing that he regretted one of the biggest decisions of his life. And that made a lot of sense to me, because today it really seems like we diagnose regret as a disease. Everywhere we go, the bromide of live with no regrets is forced down our throats. Whether it's our cousins trying to justify their weird facial tattoo, or our president defending his abrupt withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, America has developed what Professor of Philosophy Anna Gottlieb coins as a no regrets cult, in which we've pathologized regret as an emotion to be avoided at all costs. But ironically, our regret aversion is nothing but a prescription for more pain. So today, let's discuss first how we act irrationally because of our paranoia of future regret. Next, how we suppress our regrets over our past. Before finally coming up with some not so regrettable solutions. Everyone has regrets. You probably regret giving up your Sunday afternoon just to listen to a group of 7 high schoolers complain about society for 1 hour and 10 minutes. But most of us don't ever confess to our mistakes. A survey conducted by George Mason University found that over 80% of American adults claim to be living an entire life without regret by making decisions they knew they wouldn't regret in the future. But that's actually the first part of our problem. A lot of us are terrified of future regret. Let me ask you this. When you picture regret, what do you see? Maybe an unfulfilled cubicle worker or an old man lamenting his mistakes. Or maybe it's a young speech competitor who forgot to wear his pants during his speech round. We're good. You see, this dramatically negative depiction of regret naturally makes people paranoid. But as Professor of Behavioral Economics E.L. Winter points out, this paranoia keeps people stuck in dead-end jobs, college majors they don't like, and unhealthy relationships. But not only does our fear of future regret cause us to limit our own potential, we use it to limit others. In the medical industry, post-treatment regret is a sufficient reason to reject treatment to a patient, even if they explicitly request it. Take, for example, Holly Brockwell, who went to 4 different hospitals just to get sterilized. And at every single hospital, they told her the same thing. You're going to regret it in the future. And to be fair, those doctors might be acting without malice. But when we tell the trans person who wants to get a gender-altering surgery, or the woman with an unplanned pregnancy who wants an abortion, that we're afraid they're going to regret it in the future, we're not helping them. We are weaponizing regret to control them. And that's sickening. When I was younger, my uncle used to tell me stories about how some patients, no matter how many test results they were given, simply refused to accept the fact that they were sick. And that's similar to the second way our problem pans out. When we're supposed to regret some past action, we refuse to acknowledge it. Nowhere is this as clear as our current debate over America's history. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with feeling proud as an American, but to many people, in the words of Professor Gottlieb, regretting America's history is seen as a complete rejection of America as a whole. Following the Capitol riots, no white guild signs were constructed in front of the houses of people of color in Montgomery County. The people who put up the sign said that people of color were making others feel guilty for being American. So this was just their way of retaliating. And this suppression of regret extends far beyond the confines of Montgomery County, all the way to our nation's capital. When asked about his usage of the phrase Chinese virus and the corresponding 100% increase in Asian hate crimes, former President Donald Trump responded, "I don't regret it at all." And when asked the same question, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy responded, "I don't regret it. The virus came from China, and that was the knowledge we had at the time." To them, those statements were political calculations, because according to Professor Gottlieb, admitting regret would hurt them politically. But for the millions of Asian Americans across the country, those statements made us afraid to leave our houses. Just last month, a woman physically assaulted a 6-year-old Chinese boy, yelling things like, "I know what you people do. It's all your fault." And obviously, Apologizing wouldn't have solved all of anti-Asian hate, but I can't help but imagine if those politicians just admitted their regret. Would that 6-year-old boy have to have been hospitalized? Would the 8 people murdered in Atlanta be alive today? Regret isn't some disease we can get over easily. It could be chronic, but it's not fatal. When I was in 8th grade, my grandma passed away. I felt terribly guilty for not spending more time with her, but every time I felt regret, I shoved it aside. It seemed pointless because there's no changing the past, is there? So when my grandpa moved in with us, I avoided him too. I thought grandma would come up in conversation and both of us would just feel sad. One night, we were at the dinner table alone, eating pork noodles that my grandma used to cook for us. I casually remarked, I should have learned to make these noodles with white po. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I felt a rush of profound regret. And then I realized something. My grandma might be gone, but sitting in front of me was my grandpa, who I could still get to know. My regret was my opportunity for redemption. Now, I set up part-time every week to cook with him, and turns out he's kind of hilarious. He really wants me to go on his favorite Chinese dating show because he's convinced that's how I'll meet my future wife. And to this day, I still wonder who exactly my grandma was. That regret still hurts a lot. And I know every one of us in this room has felt it before. An opportunity lost, a friend we hurt, a person we took for granted. And it's fine to feel bad about these events because here's the thing. If we truly care about someone or something, we should feel pain when things go wrong. Regret isn't a reminder that we did badly. It's a reminder that we can do better. So how do we do better? First, we need to change our attitude. Instead of viewing regret as a shameful emotion, recognize that it's a deeply human thing to feel. In fact, psychotherapist Catriona Rotzley writes that to feel regret is the strongest sign of a life meaningfully lived. Next, regret only becomes useful when we learn and take action, make concrete goals to improve from our mistakes. Instead of saying, I absolutely shouldn't have done that. Ask yourself, why didn't I do that? And is it too late to do better? Is it too late to pursue a passion in your mid-40s? Is it too late to apologize to a friend you hurt 10 years ago? The answer is probably no, because it's almost never too late to be who you might have been. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm still lost. I'm still going to college next year. I still have no idea what I'm doing with my life. But I made my peace with the fact that I'll probably graduate with 1 or 2 regrets. Because I'll learn. I'll improve. And that's life. Isn't it?
Thank you.
Hi, I believe I'm the 5th speaker. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'll also be keeping my own time on the side. There are 14 major punctuation marks in English, including the question mark, the exclamation point, the colon, the semicolon, and of course, the period. Periods go at the end of a sentence. They indicate that a sentence is ended. But sentences aren't the only thing that periods end. According to society, periods mark the end of the simple, carefree life of girlhood and the beginning of womanhood. Every month, the uterus lining is shed in the process known as menstruation. It's a process that occurs in about half the population for 40 years of their lives. Despite the fact that a substantial amount of the population experiences a period, menstruation is still a highly taboo topic. In fact, according to the New York Post, 42% of women have experienced period shaming in their lifetimes. We as a society both shame women for menstruation and deny them the appropriate resources and information they need to deal with this natural process. So today, let's first discuss how the advertising industry has historically perpetuated menstrual stigma, then discuss the lack of education and resources that leads to the discomfort surrounding period conversations. Next, look into the harmful impacts of period stigma. Finally, we'll explore some potential solutions. Historically, ads for menstrual products have been extremely disrespectful of women, prioritizing societal expectations over the actual needs of the woman. A 1960s commercial titled "I Suffered from Menstrual Pain" features an image of a worried-looking man who claims he feels sorry for women on their periods, but he also feels sorry for their husbands. He claims to suffer each month while his wife is feeling irritable on her period. Until one day, his wife tried Femicin, whereupon all their issues as a couple were solved and they lived happily ever after. In dispersing this commercial, periods are depicted as being a problem in need of a solution. Despite the fact that Femicin's commercial was released several decades ago, these demeaning ads have had rippling effects on the modern menstrual hygiene industry. And the implications of this have limited our knowledge of women's healthcare today. In most countries, there is an absolute lack of information and resources being spread about periods. In fact, according to NaturCare, 72% of boys had not been taught anything about the menstrual cycle in school, and 3/4 of children are not satisfied with the education they received on periods. When the majority of the male population knows next to nothing about periods, they cannot sympathize with women. They instead resort to harassing and bullying women for a process that women cannot even control. In 2016, Alicia Coleman was fired by her employer, Bobby Dodd Institute, for accidentally leaking menstrual blood on her chair at work. As a result of the onset of menopause, Coleman was experiencing extremely heavy, unpredictable periods. In essence, Coleman was punished for her anatomy and publicly humiliated by her employer. But it's not just men who aren't being taught about periods. Women too are taught to be disgusted by their own bodies. According to Berkeley Public Health in Nairobi's Dar es Salaam, 75% of girls had not been taught anything about the menstrual cycle. People who experience periods themselves aren't being taught about a natural biological process occurring in their own bodies. Instead, by failing to have conversations about periods, menstruation is portrayed as being dirty or disgusting. And this stigma persists and perpetuates sinister impacts on our women. According to UNICEF, women spend an estimated 2,535 days, or 7 years of their lives, on their periods. This can lead to thousands of dollars being spent on menstrual hygiene products. Rather than making this basic necessity more easily accessible to women, 30 states still tax tampons as a luxury item. In fact, in California alone, until the tampon tax was eliminated, the state generated an estimated $20 million from the taxation on menstrual products. Now, on the other hand, products like Viagra are not taxed since they're considered medically necessary. Right, so Mitch McConnell's sex health is more important than the millions of girls who aren't being taught about periods. Our society is so severely uneducated about menstruation that tampons are considered luxury items rather than basic human rights. And this goes on to impact period poverty. According to Forbes, a survey of low-income women in a large United States city found that nearly 2/3 struggle to afford period products. Without access to menstrual hygiene products, women are more susceptible to a wide range of infections and diseases, including cervical cancer, bacterial vaginosis, and even infertility. A 2018 Indian study was conducted. 558 women were questioned about their menstrual hygiene practices and later tested for reproductive tract infections. The study's results demonstrated a high correlation between poor menstrual hygiene practices and rates of infection. On top of dealing with menstrual stigma, low-income groups do not have the resources to battle this high rate of infection. If we're too afraid to use the words pad, period, and tampon in public, how are we supposed to spread information about the sad reality of period poverty? We can't. And this issue has rippling effects on girls everywhere. And I felt this myself. Growing up, my own parents and the education system failed to teach me about periods, about my own body. Instead, one day over summer break, I woke up to find blood on my pants. Frantically, I tore through my bed sheets, but it was too late. My dirty period blood had ruined the mattress forever, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I felt so ashamed and guilty that day. In fact, I was so embarrassed with myself that I cried about it. I cried about the singular drop of blood on my mattress. No girl should ever experience the shame that I felt that day. So what is the solution to this widespread issue? First, we must normalize conversations about periods and teach people of all genders about how menstruation works. Understanding the anatomy behind periods will help dispel myths and misconceptions which justify the oppression of women. Teens and preteens should be taught about periods in school so they know not only how to deal with their own periods, but they can also potentially help their peers deal with theirs. Next, period products should be exempt from taxes all across the globe. Pads and tampons are not luxuries, but basic human necessities and should be treated as such. Finally, schools should provide their students with free menstrual products, such as pads and tampons. Menstruating students already deal with uncomfortable symptoms of menstruation during the school day, so they should not be worried about the financial burden of periods as well. By making menstrual products more easily accessible and widespread, information about periods will naturally be spread as well. Menstrual stigma is not going to go away anytime soon. But change starts with all of us. So together, let's make everyone's favorite punctuation mark the period. Thank you.
Hey Arnav, we're ready whenever you are.
Awesome. Let me just get set up. Are you able to hear and see me okay from here?
We're able to hear you, but I'm not able to see you yet.
Is that like the same for everyone or?
Yeah, I don't see your speaker, I mean your camera on.
Okay, can I quickly just rejoin the call and see if that fixes it?
Sure.
Awesome. Are you able to see me now by any chance?
Not yet.
Are you joined through the web or through the phone?
I'm joined through the web.
I think you have to do something to allow your camera to, see if it's blocking your camera somewhere.
Okay, let me.
Maybe we can
Yeah,
start.
we can see you now.
Yeah, now we can see you.
Can you see me like now?
Yeah, yeah,
Like my front camera?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Before I start, two main things. One, the title is in the chat. It should be the same on the ballot, but in case you missed it, my speech is called It's Never Too Late to Apologize. And second, my voice might sound a bit hoarse because I've had a cold the past few days. Don't worry, it doesn't spread through the internet, but I've been coughing the past few rounds, so just a heads up in case that happens. And if everyone's good to go, I guess I can start. Awesome.
Yes.
I've listened to a lot of different songs in my life, but one still has me confused to this day. It's called Apologize by Timbaland. You might have heard of it. It goes something like, It's too late to apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late. And in case you hadn't heard of it, well, now you have. But I constantly keep asking myself, why did he feel like it was too late to apologize in the first place? Well, because nowadays, it really seems as though he isn't the only one feeling like the time has passed to do something. Too often, we wrongly believe that it's simply too late to make a change. We erroneously impose time limits on what we are able to achieve, and thereby rob ourselves of the potential for personal and collective growth. Anne-Laure Leconf, award-winning entrepreneur and member of the International Society for Neuroscience, explains that we've developed a time anxiety, where the sense of time slipping away and never to return hinders us from progressing. And this happens on a daily basis, from refusing to reconcile with your friend after an argument, because it's been a while since you've last talked, to even giving up on learning your own native language, despite the fact that you can barely even hold a conversation with your grandparents. We've all been affected. So today, let's first explore how assuming it's too late prevents us from starting something. Next, stopping something. Before finally exploring some solutions that aren't too late to implement. Now in the song, Timbaland utters two distinct lines that still catch my ears off guard every time I listen. It does. I take another chance, take a fall, but I'm afraid it's too late. Not only are these the only two lines in the entire song that don't rhyme, but it also perfectly relates to the first way that our problem pans out. Simply put, believing that it's too late disincentivizes us from starting something or taking those types of chances. And it begins in the workplace. We've all seen our parents or even ourselves working jobs that we're unhappy with. In fact, according to a study conducted by The Guardian, 80% of people who consider switching jobs before the age of 33 choose not to because they feel like it's too late after dedicating years to their profession. And this issue of trying to start a new chapter of life extends beyond the 9-to-5 jobs. Take something as common as a relationship, where the University of Utah found that 87% of partners contemplate leaving their unhappy relationships, yet only a few act on it, because the majority feel like it's too late for them after putting in time. But the severity of this issue is truly realized when taking a look at the lives of people who have not only suffered emotional, but physical pain as well. In 2018, several women stepped forward and accused Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore of assault, decades after the incident had taken place. Moore responded to these claims by saying, "To think that grown women would wait 40 years to bring up charges is absolutely unbelievable." The court said he was innocent and disregarded those claims because they felt like they were brought up too late. And that day, a message was sent to all survivors that their stories didn't matter if they were brought up years after the incidents. Who are we to dictate when people can speak and when they can't? But not only do we let ourselves and others dictate when it's too late to start something, but also when it's too late to stop or put an end to something. And this is the second way that our problem unfolds, and it's most reflected on an interpersonal level through the story of Lisa Wiggins. You see, Lisa was going through a rough patch in her life, so she decided to pick up smoking. But this way of relieving stress soon turned into something much worse for her. By the age of 45, she tried to quit 3 times, but after turning back to cigarettes after every time, she eventually gave up and deemed it too late for her to try. And she's not alone. Because it's the same story for 70% of all adult US smokers. People, communities, families all lose hope. And this couldn't have been more apparent than in our response to the Tulsa Race Massacre. 100 years later, there's a push to give financial reparations to survivors. But according to a 2021 Gallup poll, 71% of Americans resist this idea because they feel like it's too late to fix an issue that happened over a century ago. We need to realize that the past never dictates when it's too late to change the present. And we've all felt the consequences of this issue. But I could never truly understand its magnitude until my family and I experienced it for ourselves. A few years ago, we got a call from India that my great-grandmother didn't have much time left, so we decided to fly over there to get a final opportunity to say goodbye. By the time we had reached, she had already passed away. I remember walking into my uncle's home that day and seeing my relatives crying, barely being able to break the news to us. And in that moment, my mom turned to me and painfully said, "We're too late." She was gone, and it was too late for me to say goodbye. But a few days after the funeral, my family and I sat down together, shared funny stories about my great-grandmother, and smiled about them. I remember how I used to chase her around the house, play board games with her, eat her homemade food, talk with her. I was able to relive those happy moments, and that brought me to a realization that perhaps it wasn't too late for us after all. I'm sure we've all had that one moment in our lives where everything's just crumbling down apart and we feel like it's too late for us to change the outcome. Well, now's the time we finally change that outcome. Because as ironic as it may sound, if we don't make the change right now, it may quite literally be too late